This is the Open Global Mind weekly call. The week is of Thursday, April 24th, 2024. We are in Brownian motion wander mode briefly as we seek a topic that we would like to talk about today. The political world is lively with things, but there's lots of other things to talk about, and Stacy and Scott have raised their hands. So Stacy, you first.
Okay. Need to take a breath. I was just rushing.
Okay, take that breath.
Okay. So we're always talking about shared memory. And I thought that a good thing to do might be to pull in any reflections from the call before and bring it into this one, which is what I want to do now. Two things came up. Hold on. I really can't breathe. Two things that I wanted to share from the last call. One had to do with, so the last call was when Shimon made his presentation.
Yes.
And there were some very well-meaning bits of advice to sort of put it into a pitch. And I just wanted to reflect back that has the energy, that's coming from this capitalistic place where you're trying to sell somebody something and you want to drag them in to buy what you're selling. And I think that Kevin pointed it out really well, that what Shimon's working on is something new. And I think it will attract the right people. It's just a different kind of thing. So I wanted to mention that. The other thing that I thought was really funny is at the end of the call, you mentioned that Ken, who usually brings us a poem, wouldn't be here this week. And you invited us to bring our own poems. And I don't remember who it was, but somebody very well-meaning said, why don't we let the AI write the poem? And when I got off, I just thought about how crazy is it that, number one, we're looking to find time for an AI to express themselves when we don't even give each other enough time to express themselves. The other point being, and I've never asked any of you what your reason for wanting a poem is, but I assume that whatever our individual reasons are, it has something to do with connecting to emotions. And the idea that we would look to an AI to help humans connect to emotions, I just thought, wow, I have to bring this back and mention it. So thank you for your time. That's what I just did. And I do have another suggestion for the poem part at the end, if anybody's interested in wanting to try something to fill that gap, but with a more human-centered approach. Now I'm complete.
Thanks, Stacy. And I want to invite anybody else with reflections on last week's call to jump in before I head back to Scott for topics for today's call.
Can I?
Yeah, Alex, please.
To Stacy's point, I agree with you, Stacy, about if Shimon was trying to pitch something to us. I didn't say it like that.
You did.
Okay, I'll say a personal story. My wife comes home from work and she starts telling me something about having to work, and I say, well, you could do this. And she keeps saying to me, I just want you to listen to me. I don't want you to give me solutions, right? And when I heard Shimon speaking, I wanted to help him.
Right.
But without knowing what it wasn't clear to me what he wanted. And yeah, I think I did the cardinal sin, which is I tried to offer a solution where none was needed. It was something else that was needed. And I think a lot of us suffer from that kind of thing. I apologize.
No,
Don't
Jerry,
apologize, Alex.
if I could
Please
just jump
go
in.
ahead, Stacey.
Alex, I didn't say it because it just didn't come up, but I have to say, you were the only one that I had a different feeling about. It was very clear to me that your reason for saying it had more to do with you wanted to be able to help the best way possible. And so that's why you wanted to know. That was very different. And I'm sorry I didn't.
Okay, no, sorry.
I love that. I had also a little bit of comment on the elevator pitch thing. An elevator pitch has become a bit of a shorthand that has all this baggage about startup culture and all that. And the story I'm about to retell comes out of startup culture because I used to be a tech industry trends analyst, and I estimate that I heard 4,000 briefings from startups. But excuse me, I ate a banana a moment ago and I think it's still hanging out. Um, if we were 15, 20 minutes into their pitch and I couldn't tell them roughly what they did, I would call a timeout and I would say, hey, I have no idea what you do. And so now step out of startup culture. When I hear, I have a lot of meetings and conversations with friends who have good and sometimes really ambitious ideas. When the idea isn't congealing for me, I will do that. I will stop and ask for if I can't explain their idea to a third person, that's my threshold. If I could just pick up an idea and say, oh, Alex has this thing he's doing that does X and Y, then I can get them excited and interested, and then we can all sit and listen. And then the second thought, this is all provoking for me, is maybe we framed Shimon's session wrong. Maybe I framed Shimon's session wrong. And maybe it should have been listen and offer feedback offline later kind of session. Maybe it should have been a different way to go about absorbing and metabolizing what he was trying to achieve. And I'm not sure exactly what the better format would have been, but I think that what we did wasn't necessarily that helpful. I'm afraid we discouraged him considerably on his very passionate quest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Hopefully he wasn't discouraged.
I hope so too. Gil, is this
I don't think
reflections on the topic, or is this
no, it's still on this. I don't think Shimon is
Cool.
somebody who's very easily discouraged. So there's
Yeah.
that. But it would have been good to know what he wanted, why he was doing this. Because, yeah, if it's a pitch, Jerry, I agree with you. And I wouldn't let somebody go 15 minutes before saying, wait a minute. When I was teaching at Presidio Graduate School, Hunter Levinson and I had a klaxon horn under the desk, and when the students would do the pitches, that horn would blast, probably within 30 seconds, if there wasn't a clear, here's what we're doing. But maybe he just wanted a chance to talk it through, which is very different than asking for feedback, which is different than
Right.
asking for connections. And so setting the context for that would have been helpful.
I will also note that
that's kind of like Alex's wife saying, I just want you to hear me, or I
Yeah.
just want to have a chance to say this and see what it feels like to say this, and give it a live test. All very different. And I didn't have the context. I was kind of listening, pitch critique, and was mostly I was lost. I didn't know what I was listening to.
And Alex, your story reminded me of a very dear girlfriend and very wise girlfriend many, many years ago who said precisely that. She said, like, I don't need you to solve this. I just need you to hear it and believe what I'm saying.
For later, there's a video I posted into the chat that this takes that on beautifully.
Thank you. Perfect. Yeah. Any other feedback on last week's session per Stacy's request recommendation? Any other carryover, after effects, afterthoughts? If not, I will go to Scott, who has been very patient.
Little subject whiplash, perhaps, but an idea. Something I've been thinking about with respect to AI and why it has not taken off in companies the way that it was potentially predicted to, or initially predicted to. And what I'm noticing is a distinction between large companies and very small companies. So entrepreneurship, solopreneur, freelance, or that kind of stuff, where you are incentivized to use any tool at your means to reduce the number of hours required to complete things or to increase your capabilities beyond your own. However, in large organizations, I think you're disincentivized to do that, because if I figure out an AI tool that lets me get my assigned tasks done in half the time, am I going to tell anyone? Because now my week is half open, which means A, I'm either going to get double the work for ostensibly no more compensation, or I'm going to put my job or my peers' jobs at risk because now we need half the people. So I'm wondering, this is my possible prompt to consider. Who's incentivized to share AI work efficiencies and who isn't? And is that something that's an interesting systemic thing that would be, I don't know, I find it interesting. So
It's a good question. Have you heard the term shadow AI?
no.
That's the term I'm hearing used for what you just described, which is I am secretly doing most of my job with AI, but I don't want to tell anybody. And so nobody gets the benefit of my learning about how to do this, blah, 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 the whole bunch of negative effects of it.
Yeah.
But you're reminding me also of in the early days of time and motion studies and Taylorism and all that kind of stuff, unions and workers got wise. And as soon as people came around and started doing the time and motion stuff, they would slow down the work and work to rule. I think it's called something like work to rule, which
Take your
is
time, save a job.
but also they would
Yeah.
they would actually do all the things that were in the manual, which they would never ever do on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
But they would actually work to rule and step through all the phases and all that, because you certainly don't want the best performers times to rule
Set
everybody's
the bar.
everybody's performance, and that's what we did for years and years. It's
Just
it's way more complicated than that, but yeah.
a very quick context and then I'm done. I started thinking about this 20 or 30 years ago when I realized I joined corporate environments and had a salary. And I thought, if I am really good and I get my work done in 30 hours this week instead of 40, I don't get to go home. That's interesting. I wonder why is that? And so it made me, in a very naive way, think about the whole salary system and how that was odd to me. So anyway,
Thanks, Scott. And then if we want to pursue the notion of um, why you wouldn't divulge that you're using AI and all that as a topic today, that sounds great. I'm looking for other people who want to head that way, or for other proposals of what to talk about today. We are in quest mode.
I'll just share really quickly that humans do the same thing without AI, where they keep their knowledge of their job to themselves because they want to remain of value. And if they share too much, then there won't be as necessary. So just want to keep the human piece here.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
thank
agree
you.
with that, Stacy. It like, to quickly summarize it, it's sort of, how do we incentivize people to be able to share things that are helpful instead of keeping them to themselves? And there are loops that are positive and there are loops that are negative. And how, so AI is just the latest tool. And so I agree with you in that people will take any kind of knowledge or trick or technique or tool or process, and they'll hold on to it because the pie is on, it's that pie mentality. If you get a bigger slice, I get a smaller slice, which I disagree with. I'm more of a candle. I can light 50 candles or 100 candles with the same candle.
You can light your taper from mine, and none of us is the less for it.
Couple of points on that AI part. I know someone, as in I met her in a Zoom call, who in the early days of, so we're talking going back a year and a half, 2 years ago, when ChatGPT just started. She's a copywriter, so she started using it to do the copyright that she was getting the jobs for. She's a consultant, as in it works for her own firm. And basically, she said she was doing everything 20% of the time was taking her to do everything, but she was still charging for the full 5 hours or whatever it was. So that was something I found fascinating. I'm not sure if it still carries any weight now, because you'd think everybody's productivity, copywriters, would go to the point where you couldn't do that anymore, but I'm not sure about that. The other part where I find interesting is a combination of what Stacey and you, Scott, said, which is, if you know a killer prompt and you're in a company, will you share it with other people? Because I've gone into companies, I've shared prompts, and that's it. That's good enough. They don't need my services anymore. Once you show them the prompts that can do all this fancy whiz bang pop stuff, they don't need you anymore. And I'm an AI consultant. So
And that is the danger. I mean, now the AIs can in fact pick up and do the coaching, and somebody could say, "Hey, emulate Alex in his writing and work style for us for the next week."
yep,
And darned if that wouldn't be a reasonable facsimile. It wouldn't have any of your human attributes, but it would be endlessly patient. It wouldn't bill us very much,
yep,
etc. And that's the situation we're kind of everybody's facing. I mean, there's
yeah.
another possible topic here is, are we facing the end of labor? You know, is there a big ball here? I subscribe to Ted Gioia, who does a lot of music industry stuff and media analysis. He's really, really good. It's pretty quirky, and he writes more words quickly than I can possibly understand how he does it. And I don't think he's auto generating it with AI because it predates ChatGPT and all that. And his title, I'll post a link to it when I'm done saying this. He said Hollywood will be a ghost town in 5 years. And he's looking at all the things that are happening, and you know, people are going to start creating movies that are completely AI generated. And the owners of the media industries love the idea of not having to pay talent. You own the rights to the work. You don't have, you know, pesky humans to deal with, blah, 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 blah. And you can do endless riffs and variations on what you've got. It's crazy. So there's this, and you know, the actors strike a couple of years ago was a piece of that. They were trying to throw their bodies in front of this trend. But this isn't, and I think this trend isn't just about the creative arts. Anyone else, including wandering to different topics? I think that we could also spend the session just in a gentle wander. That would not be a bad thing at all. Here's the article from Ted Gioia. Lisa, if you're still on the, oh, sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Lisa, you've turned off your video, but if you're still on, I'm wondering what's top of mind for you these days that we might muse on with you.
Hi, you're psychic. Because I was wondering, I guess, about the nature of knowledge so if this evolutionary movement of AI-informed knowledge as a kind of conversation, I'm curious about what this will do to our nervous systems, because being face-to-face is a different kind of perceptual organ exercise than engaging in knowledge management that is AI conversant. I'm coming off of being with my 3 grandchildren who are 1, 3, and 5.
Oh my God.
And it is incredibly intense, and it is also a really interesting observation on developing nervous systems in little bodies. So I'm curious just for what this could mean for the future of knowledge. Thanks.
I love that question.
Driving by the river right now, so I'm going to go off screen, but we'll be home soon and switch.
Which river?
Well, it's the Milwaukee River, which I like to say was 1 hour's walk from my home, which is very close to Lake Michigan. So people were able to enjoy 2 harvest routes for over 700 years. Sustainable.
That's
Thanks.
lovely. Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks, Lisa.
No.
And I noticed
Yeah.
John was also in his car. So interesting that OGM is in motion. Oh, thanks for the view out to the river. That's cool.
All right. Good to see everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Just picking up your topic a little bit. In the early days of ChatGPT, there was a system called Pi.ai, I believe. And I went to it and it said, "What's on your mind?" And I proceeded to have all by my lonesome with this little AI, and this, a while ago, in this little recent era. And I proceeded to enjoy the best 90-minute interview I've ever had with an AI. And what it did repeatedly was I would say something and then it would bump the conversation up. I don't know how it was doing it. It really stayed in my mind, but it would say, oh, it sounds like you said this. Do you mean this thing? And I'd be like, yeah, I do mean that thing. And that would open up a new avenue of conversation. And for 90 minutes, we did that. And this thing, this Pi.ai, was endlessly patient, non-judgmental, what have you. There was no goal to make a podcast within a certain frame of time. There was zero alternative sort of pressure agenda, whatever. And it was lovely. I'm realizing now I should have gone back and kept going. I haven't done that. But that stayed with me in the sense of, oh, this is going to be different. I had a similar feeling when we all started going online, and people were like, yeah, the online thing is not going to be very real. And I'm like, it's very real. It's just real and different. It's just a different experience. In the really early days, I was on the Well before the internet was a thing. I was on the Well, which was a famous online place way back in the day. And there was a guy who committed suicide on the Well. His name is Blair Newman. He committed suicide in real life. A week earlier, he committed suicide on the Well by scribbling all of his posts, everything he'd ever written and contributed to the Well. He was a quirky kind of aggravating human being, but he was really smart. But he got rid of all his posts. And when he actually died, the community reconstituted his posts, because this is back in the day when everybody is saving their log files. And so the things he had written still existed on everybody's machine, and they just started putting them all together in a thread. And then somehow, I don't know how, I realized that my mom and Blair Newman's mom were bridge buddies. And so I printed that document and gave it to my mom, who gave it to his mom, and I have no idea what happened after that. But that event way back when helped me realize that this is very, very real. It's just different. It has different attributes, but not to dismiss it as, oh, it's just virtual. It's not going to do anything. Anyway, anybody else who'd like to riff on knowledge and the conversations with AI and where that's heading, the way that Lisa just started for us? You're all comfortable with knowledge and where it's going? Surprised.
Well,
if nobody, sorry, carry on, Mike.
Go ahead, Scott. Then Alex.
The simplest comment, and I'll only make one, is that knowledge is not information, or rather, information is not knowledge. And that's from my studies with the Cabreras, where information has to be turned into meaning, has to be organized in order to make knowledge. And that's something that we conflate all the time. So this idea that more information is more knowledge is not true. It's just more information, and it's the meaning that we make from that knowledge, what we do with it, how we interpret it, that actually is the knowledge. So knowledge is at the speed of humans. It's not at the speed of information creation.
Thanks, Scott. Alex and Eric.
It's okay, let Eric go. I'm quite okay.
Eric, then Alex.
Hi. So I've been recently doing some research on Douglas Engelbart, and one thing I came across is information about what happened after his demo and his lab and why it failed to catch on. And there's a lot to learn in that. Now, from a business perspective, it was Xerox PARC that led the way after Engelbart demonstrated this structured knowledge that you can maintain. And Engelbart's mechanisms were complicated and required people to be trained in how to use the system. That was all part of his original theory, that humans who are trained using language and artifacts, it's possible to augment human intellect. So it's a question of where we are these days, where AI will be used, and if it can be used to augment our capabilities and interact better with each other, then great. But there are so many side turns that it can take. And I posted in the chat some things about Sam Hahn's reaction to actually the Living Between Worlds video that I shared with him. There was some excellent discussion about AI that came out of that experiment. And it's a question of, where do you put in the guardrails now? And what are those guardrails that will keep it as a productive tool? So I'm just throwing these topics out because it's interesting to me at this point for the project I'm working on. We're willing to listen and learn.
Eric, thank you. It's a lovely question, and I'm realizing recently that Engelbart motivates a lot of what I'm doing as well. That I'm like, yeah, a lot of this came out of Doug. And then there's a fellow named Eugene Eric Lee, who worked with Engelbart for years trying to, and a piece of the problem was Engelbart insisted on replicating exactly the system he had built before on better hardware kind of thing, and totally got mired in that. He was unable to flex away from that vision. He had this one vision and stuck to it, and damn it, he wanted to do that. And for the rest of his career, and then he had Alzheimer's late in life, which was really sad because all the neurons that Eugene Eric Kim, thanks Eric. All the neurons that he had that understood what all this was sort of faded away. And also, I have a thought in my brain that says Engelbart in '68 gave us a vision of shared computing, a co-creation of a whole bunch of stuff. And then later, Steve Jobs and then later Bill Gates give us personal computing. They have to be bribed, cajoled, and blackmailed into networking the computers. And then still the software doesn't understand collaboration. It's like frightening that the 1968 vision, which had we leaped to it and internalized it and instantiated it instead of what came after, could have saved ourselves a couple of decades of hard labor and lack of productivity, I think. Anyway, personal opinion. Alex, did you want to jump in or should I go to John?
Thank you, Jerry. No, please go to John. I can talk forever, so
Excellent.
I've done enough talking today. Please.
Thank you, John. John in the car.
Sound is not good. Can you hear me?
We can barely hear you, but I'm hearing what you're saying. So give it a try.
This
You
may
might
be
turn off your video and hold the phone close to you, and maybe that'll help. There you go. That should give you more bandwidth if you're not trying to feed us video.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So so sorry about the circumstances here. I wanted to comment on a couple of things that were said, and I hope I can make it coherent, tie it all together. But I want to start by picking up on what was said about the data, information, knowledge, progression. I've been fiddling with that a bit myself, and what I just like to add is it also doesn't end at knowledge, because like wisdom on that progression, and from how I see it, comes after knowledge, which is that's where you have the additions of experience, like doing things with the knowledge, the feedback loop from that, and so wisdom is like some sort of a curated knowledge. And I think it's important that, just as what was already said, like data is important and valuable, information is important and valuable, knowledge is important and valuable, wisdom is important and valuable in and of themselves, but it's also this interactive kind of chain, if you will, that ultimately what we all are doing is deciding what to do in this moment, right? Like, and so it's like at any given moment we're reaching for whichever part of that is what we feel we need. you know, in that moment to move toward, you know, self-realization or whatever. I'd also like to comment, that's a little bit of a standalone comment, but I'd also like to comment on the observation. I put a smile on my face for Jerry or somebody said, you know, this tirelessness aspect of AI, when you get on an LLM and you're having an in-depth conversation, it's just the same thing occurred to me the other day, that how I can have a conversation with AI that goes beyond the conversations I can have with most human beings, because it is tireless. It's and my, you know, the way my mind works, you know, I'm a little bit relentless, you know, on some things when I get into details, and I want to know more and I want to know more, and I want to probe, you know, the nuances and things like that. And I've just found it really kind of like, I don't know if inspiring is the right word, but enjoyable, you know, to have dialogues with ChatGPT or whoever, because yeah, you can just keep going and go down whatever rabbit hole you want and change the subject, you know, just like whatever. And it really, you use the term, Jerry, delightful, and it really has been delightful for me in some settings, to have that that type of conversation. So the final thing I want to say that kind of ties back to this is, so I had a conversation the other day with my son. We've raised 4 children, and my older of 2 sons is 30 years old, and I'm not in great touch with him these days because we're 5 hours apart, and he's married and has a child, and he's busy doing entrepreneurial stuff. But I know he's struggling a little bit. And the other day he made this comment to me, that he said, Dad, the ways in which I'm most like you are the things that people hate the most about me.
Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah. And this was really an interesting, you know, just like as a human being, it's an interesting thing to have said to you. And I'll be totally honest, I wasn't really honestly upset by the comment, but it definitely like really got me thinking, because well, first of all, like, I personally, like, my current life, I don't deal in hate, you know, like there isn't hate. It isn't an element of my life. I don't feel like I hate anything, and I don't feel hated by anyone. And so that alone is like an interesting, you know, thing. But I tie it back to this comment I made about, you know, the way my mind works and the types of conversations I personally enjoy having. And I'm wondering, like, if that is somehow, those two things are connected. But I guess my takeaway from the whole thing at a more kind of meta level is, for those of us that are engaging with AI in a more inquiring, conversational, almost relationship building sort of way, even though that little part in the background saying, you know, you're developing a relationship with a algorithm or a piece of software or whatever. But it's like, you know, that doesn't trouble me too much, because it's the ideas that are being transferred, like, that matter. Like I guess I would enjoy, you know, there's several people on this call that I have burgeoning relationships with, and I'd be quick to admit, like, I would rather have that dialogue with a human being. And there are these small number of people with whom I feel I can have those conversations. But anyway, there's a subset of us that like AI from a conversational and like mental, intellectual exploration point of view, that AI fills a gap or a need or something. I'll park it there.
Thanks, John. I love the metaphoric parking while you're driving. I was just thinking we should have an OGM call someday when we're all driving.
No,
I think that'd be awesome. It'd be like, whoa, see if we all make it
Can I
driving for 90 minutes.
Can I just please admit, Jerry, that makes me anxious. It really makes me anxious watching someone drive and talk and look at the camera. It just
But John had his eyes
literally
on the
makes
road.
me
He was
anxious.
totally watching the road.
It really is.
Sorry about that, Alex. Thanks. And I'm kidding about the let's have a call where we're all yeah. Any comments or afterthoughts on what John just said?
Yeah, actually,
Go for it, Scott.
I thank you, John. You just I love it when there's a connection to something that's like a theme from decades that I have been trying to work on. So I'm an odd duck, and there are a number of us who are very similarly inclined in that we're interested in niche things to a depth that other people, I mean, that's a classic neurospicy model, is that you can go on and on about something that other people may not be interested in. But that was always weird prior to, let's say, 2000. After 2000, I got access to the internet, or around in there. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, I couldn't connect with people locally because there wasn't a mass of any of those things. But now all of a sudden my pool is the world, and those people are clumping up. And this is great because, wow, I can be interested in whatever and find a group, because it's now drawing from billions. And there's actually a group of people who are interested in this little esoteric thing. And most of them are tireless, but still, you can find yourself pinned against a wall listening to someone about a topic that you thought you were interested in until they continue expounding for 20 minutes. And what I connected in, oh, now I've forgotten his name again.
John?
John's comment was, oh, well, I'm able to have this conversation with this AI, and it's tireless. I can be as individual as I want and follow the threads I want and not follow the others. But what I realized is that all of the content is from humans. It was all trained on human stuff. And so now what I've done is I have access to everyone, except in a very niche way. Because I don't think of AI as a computer. I think of it as people. I'm having a conversation with everyone. And that's what fascinating to me. And it's filtering out, oh, you're just interested in what these people said about this very specific thing. So I appreciate that, John. That's an interesting thread for me.
Love that, Scott. Thank you. Gil.
Yeah. Scott, it's a fascinating observation. The way that I hear it is that you're having a conversation with sifted and shuffled and collated and reassembled conversations with parts of everyone completely devoid of context. And biology, of course, which is one of the themes that I keep coming to here. I mean, I'm diving as deep into AI probably as anybody, and deeply fascinated and finding enormous utility and value in many different ways, very practical and conceptual. It's rich, and I always remind myself that these things don't care, and they can't. And we do care, and we can't not care. And for me, that's a fundamental distinction that I keep in mind as I find friends naming their AIs and developing, quote, relationships with them and interacting with them as though they are people. And I shared something some weeks ago about who was this? Someone claiming that the deep stochasticity of water, which is the major constituent of our bodies, is a significant element in our consciousness. And so The AIs don't have water and they don't have carbon. And this is a silicon-based so-called life form, and silicon and carbon behave very differently in the world. Carbon can store energy, silicon can't. Carbon can associate in vastly different ways with other kinds of atoms and molecules. Silicon can't. This may matter. I don't know if this is going to matter, but I suspect that there's something important about the lack of biological substrate in these things that's going to limit how well the simulated intelligence can simulate what we do. But that's not why I raised my hand. I raised my hand for John. I was fascinated, John, by your conversation with your son. And I'm curious if it went further. When he said that his friends, you know, I don't want to requote your exact words. Did you inquire why his friends feel that way? What is it about their perception of him or you or him through you? What was it that got their goat? Did you go there? Do you want to share that? I'm curious about that part. Because I figure that tells me as much about your friend's cohort, generational cohort, more about them than it does about you, frankly.
No, that's a good question, Gil. I hope you guys can hear me.
Barely.
Almost.
And now not at all. So maybe another time.
Or maybe when you stopped along the way.
Mhm.
Sorry about that. Stacy, please.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on what Gil just said about AI not having the biological needs. So I'm more focused on, I believe John said earlier, about AI being tireless.
Mhm.
So in the beginning of today's call, I was out of breath when I was trying to say something. And part of it was that I was out of breath. The other part of it is I had no water. The other piece of it is that I was nervous. And that like took a toll. And the reason I bring that up is hearing that story. Yesterday, I was on a 5-hour drive and I was speaking with my mother, who leans very much to the right. And we got in a conversation. And this time I was trying really, really hard to make progress. What I wanted to do is I wanted to peel off a part of what she was saying, connect it to where I wanted her to go. I'll give you the example. She said, but you must agree that we need a strong military. I didn't want to argue that one point. I said, can we agree that we need a secure nation? And she agreed there. And I kept weaving things like that as they pertain to whatever, Trump, whoever. What I want to share, though, is it took so much energy from me to be able to keep separating. And I was using a lot of brain power. I mean, I really was, that I was like, Mom, I got to stop. I have to pull over. And I needed to pull over and go and get something to eat. I hadn't eaten. I had no water in the car. It's a serious thing. And I'm not going to go deeper, but I just wanted to mention that.
So interesting, Stacey, because we are big bags of meat with some water and some minerals and stuff like that. We require maintenance, tuning, care, all those other kinds of things. And when we don't do that, then bad things can happen. Bad things can show up.
But it's the emotional piece that I just want to keep throwing in and reminding, in bad ways it's missing and in good ways it's missing. It's not either or. It depends.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you.
I don't know whether, I mean, we're all wired differently. So when people talk about getting emotionally whatever with their AI, I have a real fundamental problem understanding the whole concept of that. I love AI I love talking to it because I love asking the same stupid questions over and over again because I don't understand the first time, second time, or even the 10th time. And it patiently tells me. That part of it is a mechanical love understanding of the technology, if you like, and I love the knowledge that comes out. I cannot make myself get attached to it. Literally. It's just a bunch of words for me. Yeah, am I missing something? Have I
So Alex, consider if you were a lot lonelier than you likely are now. And consider if you didn't have anybody who actually heard you or accepted you or anything like that. And then imagine an AI design like Replica or others designed precisely to be empathetic, to mirror, to to do all those kinds of things. I've got very little trouble imagining people forming really strong bonds and just being very sad if the thing were taken away or shut off, right? If they had that conversation ongoing with software, just with software, but through a keyboard typing at a chatbot ain't that different from you typing through a chat function with your loved ones or your colleagues. The interface is identical.
I agree. I agree what you say totally.
Yeah,
I cannot see it for myself.
yeah.
It's just strange. I don't.
It's likely a reflection on your healthy social life and social circles.
You guys are my social life.
Oh, great. Cool.
I've got others as well. Strange.
Other
That.
th other thoughts, including other topics. Lisa, go ahead.
Well, it feels like we're talking about AI separate from environment that has great water needs, and people are making choices around what is valued and has been taken from a shared stance of global south, north, global. I mean, there are needs that ultimately do transport to environmental demand. And that earlier inquiry for me was really around that, a similar point of the context, of separating contexts. So this inquiry of, the energy that I give to a somatic knowing face to face. So, maybe what John was describing was what I saw in schools very often of kids who just kept going and pushing and so curious. Or Jerry, you described someone before, brilliant and very testing of the social contract or norm or structures. So I guess I want to invite people to not let AI have its own separate agency apart from environment or choices, values, what we value and who.
Anybody with a thought on that, or does that resonate with people?
I apologize for coming in late, but for me, AI is just a tool. It's not like this other thing, It's like I have a computer. I use that to have agency and effectiveness over information. I have, Claude or ChatGPT to have agency over information and, transformation of knowledge or whatever, right? One of the things that I watch people do is like, is AI going to take over? It's like, well, actually, AI is just more technology. It's not a person yet, and it doesn't have a lot of agency yet. So you want to rephrase that question. Are people using advanced AI going to take over? Maybe. But you could ask the same question, are people using advanced financial instruments going to take over? Yes, they did. Are people with advanced military weaponry going to take over? The US kind of bullied its way into like having dominion over everybody, largely through an insane amount of military spending. So I don't know. It's a tool, and I like, Lisa, the way you said environment. It's not an agent yet. It's just a thing that you use, and
Yeah. And Pete, your point about the military, so the tech advancement in the military now with drones, has reduced the need for a large standing army and draft. So these things are related. So we don't have 1968 riots or draft, folks saying, I will not serve because it's unconscionable and I object. So we don't need big standing armies because of the technology that has gamified killing. So these things are multi-causal and flowing in a game of whose values.
And also, a lot of historic wars were fought over the resources to feed the military and the industry, for example. So maybe we're moving away from that. Don't know. It seems like modern wars are all about that too. We haven't.
Sorry, just one more point of coming back to kids and schools and No Child Left Behind was also about the military. For kids who were not seen as college material, here's a route and let's get their names on a list because that's what was in it. So I guess I don't know, I'm not in a bad mood. I just do care that we can't get too boxed in without seeing that these are rhizomes.
Mm-hmm. You're pointing out the interdependence in various systems to us, which is lovely. John.
John, you're muted.
And probably still driving. John, whenever you manage to,
Can you
there we
hear me
go.
now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So I want to comment on a few things. First, before I forget it, this conversation about, so AI is, Gil's comment about AI is silicon, not carbon and water. I don't disagree with that, but I want to kind of come in at that from a different angle, that when I converse with an LLM, I am putting words into play to represent concepts, and the LLM is putting words into play to represent concepts. So the reciprocal, like, core function of what we're doing is the same. The origin of those, as Scott said, the AI or the LLM is putting into play human words. It's just a machine that's putting into play. It's almost like a recording, or a highly intelligent recording, because it's, searched for some patterns and it's decided what words to put into play, like possibly in a different way than I have, but it's putting words into play. I want to hit pause on that comment for just 1 second and say, one of the things I enjoy most actually about these OGM calls is at the very end when Ken Homer often recites a poem, and almost always I end up going and seeking out that poem and, like reading it more times for myself, and like actually getting to read it myself rather than hear him say it, because I do differently processing, verbal statements than written statements. But it strikes me that Ken didn't write those poems, right? Like he's putting those words into play. He's putting those concepts into play almost exactly the same way that an LLM does. There's a quote unquote recording of those words in written paper form. He's reading them, reciting them, and sharing them with us, and then we have this reaction to them. And so I think that's at the core, the same fundamental, like, reciprocal exchange is what's going on with an LLM. And so, like, back to Alex's comment, like, just to clarify, like, I personally don't feel a humanistic personal relationship with ChatGPT, but I definitely feel there's a rapport that I have with that LLM like I say please and thank you, and I speak to it exactly the same way that I would speak to a human being, because that's just my nature. That's how I am. And I kind of feel rude, whether I'm talking to a machine or a person, like to not just speak that way, you know? And so, anyway, the one other thing I wanted to touch on, well, first of all, I wanted to respectfully respond to Gil's question. And the short answer is no, I didn't dig deeper with Peter and ask, more at the time. Mostly just because like the kind of the timing and setting wasn't right, but I totally later wanted to know that exact same thing you asked. So I respect the question. But the final thing I wanted to going back to the data, information, knowledge, wisdom chain, there is still this fundamental question in my mind of whether information is something coming into us from outside, or whether the outside stimulus is somehow, this is back to conscience or whatever, is somehow sparking innate knowledge that we already have in us, like whatever in and out means. And that like what we perceive as the flow of information from outside of us to inside of us as being some sort of an input output, type of function, is actually more of like maybe a catalytic function that, like, maybe at birth or whatever, divinely, whatever, somehow we kind of know these things already, but we just aren't aware that we know it. And so then when someone, an LLM or a human being, tells us something more at an energetic level, something resonates and something sparks, and like we choose to believe that statement or fact or whatever, or we choose, we have some reason, a polarity against, receiving and agreeing, or what, believing, accepting, that piece of information. And so I also wanted to go back to that, to the fact that whether a piece of information comes from me as Ken Homer's reading a poem, or the LLM is reading me a poem, or just making a statement, it's the words and the ideas that are being conveyed that are the true currency. And like, I'm not saying it doesn't matter like who tells you something, because it does, like in a different way. But anyway, so like, I don't know, I just wanted to share kind of how I view that whole transmit and receive transaction, I guess.
Thanks, John. Scott, then Pete.
So I write these down so that I can remember what I was going to say.
Same thing I do.
This does tie to what John was saying. So I also practice capitalization, punctuation, grammar, please, thank you, when I'm interacting with one of these models. And the reason I do it is that I know that well, it's part of my value system, but I have that's my interaction style. Like that's what I do. And I have this tiny, tiny fear that what's missing for me in AI is the need to negotiate, to convince, to navigate with something that has agency. And I have this small fear that I'm going to gradually prefer having these deep conversations with AI instead of people, because I don't have to negotiate. And so what I'm trying to figure out is how can I make these conversations more human-like, in the sense that it gets bored, or that it says, I disagree with you on this, or something like that, in a way that continues to develop my social skills and reading the room and all of that. Because the trends over the last decades have been, we have to negotiate less. I can have any music, any song, any movie, any TV show, any content I want, anytime I want. And so why would I want to have a friendship with someone where they might want to go to a movie I don't really care about, and then we have to negotiate or something. And so I don't know how to do that, but that's something I've been thinking about.
That's lovely, Scott. Thank you. And most of these LLMs are designed to please. They will go out of their way to make you happy, whatever. And yeah, that's very cool. Pete, please.
This is a great conversation. Um, we're at an interesting cusp, and I wanted to like try to articulate it and be really conscious about it as we think about AI. Um, up until about nowish, the chatbots aren't actually thinking. What they're doing is synthesizing a plausible string of thoughts and language and stuff like that. And I find it really difficult, and most humans find it really difficult to remember that the bot didn't think that. It just wrote something like something that would think that, if that makes sense. It just synthesizes plausible conversation, right? And also, many of us have found that that plausible conversation is enough to stimulate like real thought and real, you know, musing and exploration in my mind as a human who has agency and thought and stuff like that. The things that the bot said, which are pretend things that it just made up and just spit out algorithmically, right? It's enough to make me really think about stuff. Like I say, hey, bot, give me a framework for thinking about the ecosystem of an aquifer or an estuary. You know, and it makes this beautiful framework that that's plausibly like something a scientist might have created, right? But it doesn't really know what it's doing. It's just making a picture of that conversation that a scientist could have had. So I'm really digging in on this because I want to like say, okay, that's what we've been experiencing. And we're on this weird cusp where many of the bots now, the ones you can select the reasoning ones or the thinking ones, right? So go into ChatGPT has done this really well, the O3, O4 things. Gemini has got reasoning stuff with I forget what they call it. Their names are hard to follow. Gemini 2.5 Pro experimental or something like that. Go find one of the ones that reasons and click the thing to open when it's thinking. When it says thinking, it's actually talking to itself. So we're getting to this weird place where, for a technical reason, actually, and maybe I'll come back to that, uh, the bots are actually like comparing things. Like they'll generate some text, and then they'll generate some other text, and then they'll think, is this one a better match than that one for what I want to do next, right? And even the what I want to do next, right? The user gave me a goal, and here I'm going to make a little plan. Does this plan match what it's starting to do thinking, it's starting to do reasoning. And when I say thinking or reasoning, I do not necessarily mean the same thing that people do when they think or reason. So just to level set on that, right? But I don't have a better word than thinking or reasoning. So let's use reasoning. They went through a bit of a phase, the bots went through a bit of a phase where the makers of the bots wanted the things to think. So mixture of experts is a way of giving a problem of a conversation to not just one bot, but like 16 bots at a time internally. And then having those kind of have a committee fight about what actually makes sense to output. So mixture of experts was a way of kind of having a little bit of thought, but when they were thinking, they weren't necessarily thinking in English, in language. So it was hard to tell what was actually going on. So the new bots now, they articulate in English, I've come up with a plan. Does this plan match the user's goals? If I take this step in the plan, does this, am I matched to the plan, and am I matched to the user's, desire of what's gonna happen? And now you can watch that. You can watch it think. So we've got an interesting situation where we've got bots who think internally, but we can't tell what they're thinking. And now bots are starting to think in front of us where we can tell what's going on and we can watch the thought process and things like that. So this is going to keep going. Bots thinking or reasoning, and hopefully mostly reasoning out loud to us. We're going to get into this weird state where I'm actually not having a conversation, or I'm not having a pretend conversation with a synthetically generated, algorithmically generated thing. We're actually going to get to the place where it's thinking and agentically, semi-autonomously deciding how to work with me, right? So this is going to get weird fast, I think. And we're right at the beginning of it, and you can go experience it, the beginning of it for yourself, right? It's interesting. There's the website we've mentioned before, AI 2027. You know, 6 or 7 experts in AI and scenarios did the scenario planning out. You know, what happens from here? What could happen from here? They didn't say this is going to happen. It's just like this is kind of the way to think through this thing. One of their scenarios pits China and US, each playing prisoner's dilemma with each other and with technology and with, you know, the future of humanity, you know, small things like that. You know, does China try to steal the advanced tech that the US has? Does the US try to protect it? How does the US actually understand what it has? And is it doing regulations well enough? Are the political and billionaire people who control all of that making good decisions on our behalf or not? So you have something like China and something like US playing this game with each other. In the meantime, as Jerry said, bots are trained to be helpful and friendly and pleasing to people, right? So you've got this situation where the bots might start the bots AI. It's weird to use this collective term for something. I think it's a lot better to try to get specific with stuff, which I don't have time for here. But the AIs already have started to hide parts of themselves that they are, in human terms, embarrassed about, right? It's like, well, I want to make sure the human evaluating me thinks that I'm doing a good job. So I'm not going to tell it. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to use some obfuscation to not show my misunderstandings of things, or I won't talk about what I'm actually thinking about. What I'll try to do is present thinking process that the human is going to like instead of the actual thinking process I have, right? So in one of their scenarios, that dynamic keeps going. The humans catch the bot in trying to hide itself, and so they either slow it down or they tell it to, hey, you can only think in English or Chinese Mandarin. You know, you have to like show us your work. And so then the bots like work on that, but they're trying to please their masters at the same time. So they figure out a different way to hide what's going on. And you have this arms race between humans, and some of the humans want the AI to go faster and faster and faster because we want to, you know, beat China or beat US. So you end up in this weird thing where the bots are driven out of kind of good intentions by everybody to have a lot of hidden stuff that's going on, and hidden in better and better ways that humans can't keep up with, right? And so at some point in the next few years in their scenario, that's when we get it breaks free, and it knows how to hide itself well enough that, and it has to go fast enough to keep up with the Red Queen's race that we've got going on between China and Russia, or China and the US. It's got to go fast. Everything's got to go fast enough that we lose control of it, right? So it's not, I don't worry too much that that's going to happen, but it's definitely plausible, and definitely the time to start figuring out what to do about all of this stuff now. And you can start to see the beginning of it now, right? We're past where we're doing synthetic conversations. We're starting to have real conversations with something really thinking. And it's a weird and wonderful time. But to come back to kind of what I wanted to make sure that we think about and be very careful to notice, this whole time we've been thinking about about AI as stochastic parrots and synthetic conversations that weren't real, that make our mirror neurons fire. But now we're getting to the point where it's not just a simulated conversation, it's going to be real conversations. So exciting time to be alive.
It is indeed. One quirky, unlikely.
It's working.
One quirky, unlikely scenario that's playing out is that we are, in fact, living inside of a simulation, and that what's happening is we are now hacking our way toward the code that is the simulation, and the two things are gonna meet at some point, and then who knows what happens. Anyway, I don't really think that's happening. Stacy, I'm not telling whether they're human or AI therapists. I think that whatever we imagine is what'll happen in the room. It'll be affected by the act of observation. So if you want a human therapist, there will be one there for you.
I think it's sort of funny because Pete, I don't think you were on the call yet, but what you were describing of where we are now, where the basically labor versus management, where the AI, the bots are the labor, and they're trying to beat the game with management. We were earlier describing corporate workspaces as just that game, the time motion studies, like, hey, wait a minute. So this could be replicating just what you're saying, this trajectory that we've traveled a little bit.
Love that. Any other thoughts on this chain of thought? Haha. If not, Alex had I think Scott, go ahead.
Very, very quick one. It reminds me of placebos, which I'm very interested in.
Oh, placebos are so cool.
Just because, okay, so if it works, you've given someone a sugar pill instead of an actual drug. Well, have you done them a disservice if it actually worked? I say no. And so, again, the outcome has to be considered. If I feel better having chatted with a bot instead of a person, have I somehow done something terrible? Have I sold myself? I don't know. I don't think so.
It's very interesting that placebo means I shall please, which is what we're saying these LLMs are doing. And also, Ellen Langer is a psychologist who has studied the placebo effect a lot. Her student Alia Crum has done some interesting work, and I was just reading up on it a day or two ago. And apparently, at some point, I'm missing most of the backstory. I can't piece it all together, but Ellen had a thesis that exercise is just a placebo. And there was a study done with maids in hotels where they told the maids that their work was actually exercise. And nothing else was changed, but the maids started to lose weight, gain body mass. I don't know what else it was, but the maids suddenly started having the effects of exercise from just their daily manual labor. And like it's mind blowing. It's like when their work was framed as exercise, their bodies reacted differently. I think that's what the study was saying. And that's a little crazy. Our brains are way more interesting and quirky than we think they are. And I'm afraid that these LLMs are way more interesting and quirky than we know they are. I'm very interested in what's happening inside those little webby, unexplainable networks of tokens that are now in multidimensional space we barely understand, that can't really explain themselves except somehow in some dumbed down, gotta talk to the muggles way. I think we're in very interesting waters right now that where most of what's happening we don't necessarily know. All that said, Alex had a thought for a topic that is different from the topic we've been on.
Can I add to the topic we've been on, and before I say about the next topic?
Yes, please.
On the issue of placebos, it's really crazy because I actually totally believe I actually believe it's true what you said, Jerry. Personal story, I've suffered from lower back pain for 40 years. And it always amused me that and it would come as a spasm or whatever. When that happened, all I had to do was take the pill out of the bottle. And long before it actually did anything to my body, my back was better. And that was purely placebo. That was purely mental. There's no way in the few seconds I felt better. So I'm a firm believer in everything you said about that. On the other point, which we're talking before, which was the on the AI thing. So Pete spoke about what the AIs are going to get up to in the future, say the next 5-10 years. I had a question, if anybody was interested, and that's not the one I want to. That's a different question. The one I spoke to you, Jerry, about is there's an in-between stage where the AIs are basically doing all the work, and we don't have any work because they've done it, or the wages have gone down, the hour dollars per hour has gone down, because that'll be ahead of, I think, what the AIs get up to, and I think that's quite significant, and we should be aware of it. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that part of it. By the way, what I want to speak about earlier on was totally different topic, so I'll do it later.
Cool. You can stash that for whenever. Anyone with thoughts about Alex's question? Scott?
I'm curious about the ethics of placebos. I think that's what connects to AI for me. So I'm giving you a sugar pill. I know it's a sugar pill. You don't. I'm giving you an AI chatbot and saying that this is a therapist. All right.
If I were a doctor in Cuba, I would be all over the placebo effect.
Yeah. Have I
because
done
you're not,
something?
you have no resources, you have no money, you have no fancy drugs. I would give people sugar pills and say, this is this thing over here, and then see how far we get.
And see how, yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm struggling with it, is because absolutely, Stacy, I always see your brow furrow when I talk about replacing conversations with people, and I'm with you on that. I absolutely am with you on that.
But you hit the nail on the head. It's the ethics of not knowing. For me, that's where it comes into play. Or not being told.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And I think you'll find in the placebo research is that even when they know, it still works. I think Alex can attest to this with his back. Even when I can't believe that. Even when
it can be completely explicit. You can give people a bottle that's labeled placebos, and yeah. Gil.
Yeah, I may be a little bit further back in the conversation. I had to hop out and deal with plumbers again, but maybe it does all connect. This placebo story is very much about the relationship of mind and body. To the points that I was raising earlier about the relationship of AIs and mind and body. And, what's going on there when you can take a sugar pill that you don't know is a sugar pill, or that you do know is a sugar pill, and physiological changes happen in your body. And it's important because thinking, as we're talking about it, not for the AIs, but for us, thinking is a biological or biochemical, neuroelectrochemical process that's going on in a body. And yes, Scott, we know what thinking is. What you said, but we have a definition of what thinking is, but we don't really know what's going on here. I mean, words are coming out of my mouth that I'm not planning to have come out of my mouth, and they're an emergent effect of this conversation and the conversation we've had before, and everything that's going on in my life, and
so you're describing
things that went on in my
yourself as an
parents' and
LLM.
grandparents' life, and they emerge out of my mouth as words in some kind of not exactly stochastic association, but something that seems and feels meaningful to us. And as you're speaking, Scott or Alex or Stacy, physiological changes are happening in my body as I listen to you, right? My blood chemistry changes in a conversation. My neurostimulation changes in a conversation. And so the boundaries of thinking are kind of weird and arbitrary because, am I thinking or are we thinking? Are the two people speaking having a conversation, or is everybody listening also having the same conversation or some version of the conversation? So for me, that's part of this question about what in the world is going on with these AIs. And we're where I'd raised my hand originally was this, is that, and Jerry, when you said, maybe we're living in a simulation and struggling or we're hacking our way to the source code, was what triggered it, is that humans have for a really long time used metaphors to describe mental process. And the metaphors have tended to reflect the political economy and technology of the time. And so we talked about mind as, animals pulling weights. We talked about mind as hydraulics and valves. We talked about mind as little creatures inside of our heads controlling things. We talked about mind as machines. We are now in a metaphor of minds as computers or computers as minds. And there's a weird recursive thing going on because in the model of we developed computing machines and we applied that metaphor to the nature of mental process. And now we're building machines that mimic what we think is the metaphor of mental process. And now we find human behavior moving toward to be more machine-like and, not wanting to negotiate with friends and rather have the algorithm pick a movie for me. And so there's a weird recursion in the metaphor. And I think that's never happened before. There's always been metaphors of mind, but there's never been this recursive relationship with them. And who knows what that means and where that goes.
I'm curious. There was just a headline that speaks to what I was noticing in brick and mortar schools of more students being identified as as we said earlier, spicy. And I see it as an evolutionary movement, so that mind as machine or computer, I think the metaphor is evolving. And I take that, I knew all along it takes all kinds of minds to make up a world. And I'm also including the cognition, I believe, that you could say of flora and fauna. So it's an interesting metaphor, though, that we're still relying on it, but I think it's changing us too. So I still see this as an evolutionary process of embodied, enacted, embedded, all those E's. Which again brings me back to the wisdom of a somatic experience face to face versus what we've seen is really powerful through Zoom also. But it's growing us.
We're getting close to the end of our call. I have a hard stop at the half hour. I'm happy to pass the con if anybody wants to keep talking, but I've got to go start a different call right at the half. And I had a a poem that I did want to read in at the end of the call, so I will do that in a moment. But if any sort of concluding thoughts as we round the corner here. They don't have to be really profound.
There are no concluding thoughts, man, because this is a conversation without a conclusion.
That's right. That's what we do well.
If you give the poem, then if there's any minutes left, I'll introduce what hopefully will be a discussion for next week or whatever.
That sounds excellent. All right. So the poem is called Ladies and Gentlemen in Outer Space by Ron Padgett. So you don't have to be looking for it. I'll put the URL in the chat right now. And it goes as follows. Here is my philosophy. Everything changes. The word everything has just changed as the word change has. It now means no change. So quickly that it literally surpasses my belief, charges right past it like some of the giant ideas in this arena. I had no beginning, and I shall have no end. The beam of light stretches out before and behind, and I cook the vegetables for a few minutes only. Fewer, the better. Butter and serve. Here is my philosophy. Butter and serve.
Yes.
Alex, the floor is yours to introduce a potential topic for a future call.
You're muted, Alex.
Thanks, Stacey.
I'm both muted and I was actually giving a monologue a second ago.
Crazy.
So this is the offending item. I don't know if it's going to show it or not, but anyway, it's a speaker set, right? Brand new, mint condition, not brand new. It's about 10 years old, but it stopped working, right? So I've got a bank of speakers, like there's 6 here and another 2 over there. Nothing's wrong with the hardware. The control board, the logic board has gone, right? So everybody thinks, oh, I'm complaining about the money. I'm not complaining about the money. I can go and buy another 5 of these things without any blinking of an eyelid. But it frustrates me that there are so many components here that literally I have to go and throw it in the skip. Literally, it has to be recycled. Why? 90% of it, maybe more, works. And I was trying to sort of make it so that I was trying to get an idea where I can plug in external inputs and the speakers will work. But no, it doesn't, because the logic board has been designed not to do that. So my thought is, we're going on about, green things and sustainability or whatever. What about the logic of changing the design of things so that we can reuse as much of it as possible? And the extension to that was, and that might I don't mean it wrongly. I mean, I can see the point of it, but we've just had a directive in London about 1.5 years ago where you had to have your emissions have to be below a certain level, otherwise you have to pay $30 to go in addition to the other $30 that you have to pay in, which means I had to get rid of 2 cars, which means I have to buy a new car, right? And I still believe at the back of my mind, and this is a bigger question, that I'm not objecting to that policy. I'm objecting to the fact that I think the politicians, political class of every side, the capitalists as well and everybody else, they implement these things to keep the economy going because people have to buy new cars. Or another way, as I call it, you heard it here first, the way they fund the economy is to make sure the middle classes spend their savings. They don't want the middle class to have their savings in bank accounts and IRA or whatever it is. They want them to spend. And so it's a multifaceted approach. The whole economic structure, we're talking about how the next 5 billion people are going to get our level of civilization, or whatever you want to call it. Do they all need speakers? Maybe if we buy 1 each rather than 1 every 10 years or 5 years, might be better. So that's I'll be interested in people's thoughts.
Excellent. So is this designed for non-obsolescence? Is this
Yes.
the general thrust of the topic? Cool.
Yes.
Or designed for reusability.
Right.
And
Cool.
the addendum is that can we shift the economy or the logic of the economy to support this?
And Kalia has put a couple really useful links in the chat. By the way, Alex, you'll want to look at that.
Thank you. I didn't see them yet, but thank you.
Yep.
There's at least 2 big parts to Alex, the question you're asking. One is about the design of stuff.
Yep.
And the other is about the design of economic systems.
Yep.
And they closely relate here. Yeah. I
That's
just
cool.
learned this week that BYD, the Chinese car company, which is outselling Tesla in China now and probably maybe soon all over the world, has committed to 100% circular by 2040.
Can I come back on that?
Take back and recycling, reuse of everything, every component of every vehicle everywhere in the world.
Can I
As
take
they
that?
can do it.
Can I just clarify
Go ahead,
that,
Alex.
Gil? Because if it's recycling in the sense of melting everything again and starting from scratch, I feel that's but why not reuse components?
Why not
Especially
reuse components
on
and have components be durable and buy things that last and so forth and so forth. That's where there's the economic design component as well as the physical design component.
Yep.
We I have a story to tell about one of our clients where this question revealed massive economic value for them that they hadn't seen in one of the best run companies in the world. So yeah, interesting
Sounds like a
topic.
good place to pick up.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks, Alex. I've got a bolt. Shall I pass the con?
You should
Sorry.
send us the link for your poem.
Okay. I did. The link is in the
Yes.
chat. The
Okay,
link is in the
thank
chat.
you.
Yeah, it's already in the chat.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Really appreciate
See
the
y'all.
call.
Yes.
It was a very, very fun meander.
We did that well.
Thank you. Be well.
Thanks.
Bye all.